I once believed I knew what perfection felt like. Lauren and I, we were that couple everyone envied, finishing each other's sentences, sharing knowing glances across crowded rooms, building a life that felt bulletproof. 7 years of marriage had given us a beautiful home in the suburbs, matching coffee mugs, and a photo album filled with vacation memories where our smiles never seemed forced. God, what a carefully constructed lie that turned out to be. The change was gradual, like water slowly seeping through invisible cracks in foundation. You don't notice until the damage is done. First came the late nights at the gym, Lauren suddenly developing an intense dedication to fitness that conveniently kept her out until 9, sometimes 10 at night. Her body wasn't changing, just her schedule, her availability, her presence in our home. Just trying to take care of myself, she'd say, not quite meeting my eyes as she slipped into bed smelling of shower gel and something else I couldn't place. Then came the phone, her constant, newfound companion. It was always face down, always within her reach. She'd snatch it up when it buzzed, angling the screen away from me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Passwords changed. Bathroom doors locked during texts. Hushed conversations that abruptly ended when I entered rooms. But it was Ryan's name that really broke the silence between suspicion and certainty. Ryan from accounting. Ryan with his CrossFit obsession and divorce finalizing. Ryan who suddenly needed Lauren's expertise on projects that required late-night collaboration. Ryan thinks. Today at lunch, Ryan said. You wouldn't understand this joke. It's kind of a thing between Ryan and me. I found the messages on a Tuesday evening while Lauren was, where else? At the gym. Her laptop had synced her text messages, a technological betrayal of her human one. The conversations were explicit, calculating, cold. Plans made during work hours for hotel meetups. Complaints about me, about our marriage. Strategic discussions about timing, about how to leave me with minimal financial damage to her. Most men would have exploded. Packed her things. Called her parents. Created a scene worthy of the betrayal. But rage makes you stupid, and I refuse to be stupid. So I closed the laptop, poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, and began planning. Lauren thought she was being clever, laying groundwork for a divorce where she'd come out ahead. She had no idea I was now playing the same game. So I smiled when she came home. I listened to her gym stories. I watched her fingers tap messages to her lover while pretending to check work emails. And all the while, I was 10 steps ahead, gathering evidence, consulting attorneys in different cities, moving assets with a surgical precision that would have impressed her had she known. She thought she was winning. I let her believe that. After all, the best revenge begins with patience, and I had nothing but time. The day Lauren served me with divorce papers, she wore a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the same practiced expression she'd perfected during our marriage, superficially warm but calculated underneath. We sat at our kitchen table, the same place we'd once shared morning coffee and weekend pancakes, now transformed into a battlefield of legal documents and cold intentions. I just can't do this anymore, she said, her voice breaking on cue as she slid the manila envelope across the table. The emotional toll of our marriage has left me damaged. My therapist says I might never be able to work full-time again. I nodded, watching the performance unfold. Lauren had practiced this, probably in front of Ryan, rehearsing her lines until they sounded authentic enough to convince a judge. She'd quit her marketing director position 2 months earlier, claiming stress and anxiety. Convenient timing, considering divorce proceedings typically examine current income. The settlement is fair, she continued, twisting her wedding ring, the one she still wore despite spending 3 nights a week in Ryan's downtown apartment. Half of our assets, the vacation property in Lake Tahoe, and monthly support until I can get back on my feet. She leaned forward, voice dropping to a wounded whisper. You understand, don't you? Starting over at 35, I have nothing. No career left, no financial security. Her eyes, those same eyes that had once looked at me with what I thought was love, now glistened with manufactured tears. I didn't want this, but I need to survive. What Lauren expected was protest, anger, perhaps some desperate negotiation that would give her the upper hand. What she didn't expect was my calm smile as I reviewed the documents, nodding as if considering a reasonable restaurant menu rather than the systematic dismantling of our life together. I think this all looks reasonable, I said, signing my name on the preliminary agreement. I want you to be taken care of, Lauren. Confusion flickered across her face before settling into smug satisfaction. She interpreted my compliance as defeat, a broken man accepting his punishment. As she gathered the papers with manicured fingers, I could almost see her mental celebration, calculating the alimony figures into future vacation plans with Ryan. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture I once found endearing. "My lawyer said this could get ugly." "No need for ugly," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "We're adults, after all." As she left, phone already in hand to undoubtedly text Ryan about her victory, I remained at the table, fingers tracing the wood grain patterns. Lauren believed she'd orchestrated the perfect exit strategy, a lifetime of financial support extracted from the husband she'd discarded. What she didn't realize was that her apparent triumph was simply the first move in a game I'd been strategizing far longer than she knew. Sometimes, the best defense is to let your opponent believe they've already won. The courtroom stood silent as Lauren took the stand, her posture carefully calibrated to project fragility. She wore a modest gray dress, nothing like the designer outfits that filled her closet at home, and had styled her hair in a simple, unassuming way. Gone was the confident marketing executive I'd married. In her place sat a woman who appeared broken by circumstance. Her lawyer, an older gentleman with silver hair and practiced sincerity, walked her through their rehearsed narrative. "Mrs. Bennett, can you describe for the court how the dissolution of your marriage has affected your ability to work?" Lauren dabbed at invisible tears with a tissue. "I can barely sleep through the night," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to be noticeable. "The panic attacks started after everything fell apart. My doctor says it's acute anxiety triggered by trauma." I watched from my seat as she crafted her performance, noting how she'd pause at strategic moments, how her shoulders would curve inward when discussing finances. The judge, a woman in her 60s with compassionate eyes, seemed to soften with each calculated display of vulnerability. "And your therapist's prognosis regarding your return to full employment?" her lawyer prompted. "Uncertain," Lauren replied, voice cracking. She believes the workplace stress might trigger episodes. "I'm trying to heal, but starting over at my age, with my condition." My attorney, Monica Diaz, sat beside me, her expression betraying nothing as she made occasional notes. We'd discussed this moment for weeks, preparing for Lauren's theatrical display. When it was our turn, Monica approached the bench with calm confidence. "Your Honor, before we continue, I'd like to introduce Evidence Item 47B, she stated, her voice clear and unapologetic. "A video recording from approximately 3 months ago." Lauren's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her today. The courtroom darkened as the monitor flickered to life. There was Lauren, champagne flute in hand, lounging on a leather sofa at Ryan's condo during a dinner party. Her laughter, real, uninhibited, filled the courtroom as she leaned toward a woman I recognized as Ryan's sister. "Working again?" "God, no," recorded Lauren said with a dismissive wave. "Why would I? Once everything's finalized, I'll have the lake house, the investments, and enough monthly support to live exactly how I want." She lowered her voice, though the microphone caught every word. "My therapist is a genius, wrote up exactly what I needed. Unable to maintain employment due to divorce-related trauma." She mimicked quotation marks with her fingers, then dissolved into laughter. "As if I haven't had this much freedom since college." As the video ended, the courtroom remained silent. Lauren sat frozen, her carefully constructed facade crumbling around her. The judge's compassionate expression had hardened into something else entirely, the look of someone who had seen this particular performance too many times before. Lauren's gaze met mine across the courtroom, and for the first time since she'd served me those papers with that practiced smile, I allowed myself a small, satisfied nod. Sometimes justice arrives not with a bang, but with the simple playback of unguarded truth. Judge Elaine Miller leaned forward, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she surveyed the courtroom. The compassion that had softened her features during Lauren's testimony had vanished entirely, replaced by the stern countenance of a woman who'd spent 3 decades separating theatrical performances from genuine hardship. After careful review of the evidence presented, she began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the now-hushed courtroom. This court finds Mrs. Bennett's claims of incapacitating emotional distress to be not only unsupported by medical evidence but deliberately fabricated for financial gain. Lauren's perfectly composed expression faltered. The slight tremor in her hands was no longer part of her performance, it was real now. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably beside her as Judge Miller continued her methodical dismantling of their case. The video evidence clearly reveals Mrs. Bennett's intent to defraud not only her spouse but this court. The judge's voice had taken on an edge of controlled anger. Mrs. Bennett described in her own words a premeditated scheme to manipulate both medical professionals in these proceedings. I watched Lauren's shoulders tense as her carefully constructed narrative crumbled around her. Monica, my attorney, remained professionally expressionless, though I caught the smallest nod of satisfaction when the judge turned to financial matters. Therefore, Judge Miller continued, this court denies the petition for permanent alimony. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Furthermore, the request for temporary spousal support is denied in its entirety. Lauren visibly paled. This was clearly not the script she had rehearsed. Her attorney placed a steadying hand on her arm, but she pulled away, her composure fracturing further with each pronouncement. Additionally, the judge said, gathering the full weight of her authority, Mrs. Bennett is hereby ordered to pay $12,000 toward her husband's legal fees, given the unnecessary litigation costs directly resulting from her fraudulent claims. The courtroom remained silent, but I could feel the collective intake of breath. Lauren's plan, so meticulously crafted over months, had not just failed, it had spectacularly backfired. Her eyes, now genuinely moist with tears of shock, darted toward her attorney, seeking some reassurance that this was salvageable. He offered none. This court does not look kindly upon attempts to exploit the legal system designed to protect those genuinely in need, Judge Miller concluded, removing her glasses. Mrs. Bennett, I strongly suggest you secure employment promptly to fulfill your financial obligations. As we rose for the judge's exit, Lauren finally looked directly at me. Gone was the vulnerable victim she'd portrayed so convincingly. In her eyes, I saw something both familiar and foreign, the calculating woman I'd married, but now stripped of her certainty, faced with a future she hadn't bothered to plan for. Justice, as it turned out, had arrived not with my vindication, but with Lauren's accountability. Outside the courthouse, the October air carried a bitter chill that matched the emotional temperature between us. Lauren stood beneath the stone columns, her designer coat pulled tight against her body, not for warmth, but as if she could somehow shield herself from the reality crashing down around her. We can appeal, her attorney muttered, already distancing himself as he packed documents into his leather briefcase. Though I wouldn't recommend it. Lauren barely acknowledged him. Her eyes were fixed on me as I descended the courthouse steps with Monica. The mask of victimhood had fallen away entirely now, revealing the raw desperation beneath. She brushed past her attorney and intercepted me before I could reach the parking lot. We need to talk, she said, her voice stripped of the theatrical tremor she'd perfected for the courtroom. This isn't over. Monica gave me a questioning glance, but I nodded that I could handle it. She stepped discreetly away, leaving Lauren and me face to face for the first time without an audience. There's nothing to discuss, I replied evenly. The judge was clear. Clear. Lauren's laugh was hollow. Do you have any idea what this means for me? My credit is ruined. I can't make rent next month. My parents won't even take my calls after what came out in court. I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not anger, not even pity. The emotional tether that had once bound us had finally snapped. You had 6 months to consider the consequences, I said quietly. 6 months of planning how to destroy me while posting vacation photos from my credit cards. Lauren's composure fractured completely. I can't start over at 36. Please, we can work something out privately. The judge doesn't need to know. I simply turned and walked to my car. Behind me, I heard the frantic tapping of her phone before my own vibrated in my pocket. Her final text glowed on my screen. Asterisk, I'm begging you. Don't leave me with nothing after 8 years. Asterisk. My thumb hovered over the message for just a moment before pressing delete. No response needed. Driving away, I realized the justice in this ending wasn't what I had initially sought. I hadn't won. There was nothing to win. Lauren had orchestrated her own downfall with meticulous precision. The woman who'd spent months plotting financial ruin for me had instead demolished her own reputation, security, in future with the same entitlement that had convinced her she was entitled to destroy mine. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't revenge or even forgiveness. It's simply moving forward while the past grows smaller in your rearview mirror.